We're going to begin with a series taken by a Mr. Paul Villa, taken during the daytime with color film outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Mr. Villa has a most interesting background. His first encounter with a flying saucer was during the time he was working for the Los Angeles County Beach Sanitation Cleanup Department, I believe that's what they call them. And he was picking up trash off the beach, and he had a camera with him, and he saw his first flying saucer. So he took a photograph of it. And he was told, he heard mentally, he was told, it was not mental telepathy, it was a voice he heard with inside his head, that he was not allowed to release his photograph until they authorized him to. But not this particular craft we're looking at. This is another craft that he did earlier in the early, I believe in 1962. Well, Mr. Villa thought, well, he could use some extra money, so he went and had the film processed and then took it to the newspapers, and they published it. And he had a lot of bad things go wrong to him. He lost his job, he lost his wife, and he lost his house. And he did not heed the warnings that do not release these photographs. Well, Paul needed some change of scenery, and he decided to move to Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's an auto mechanic. Went into become an auto mechanic. And while he was living in Albuquerque, again, he was contacted by the flying saucer people, and particularly this group here. He heard the voice in his head and said, Paul, get your camera and come on out to such and such place outside of Albuquerque, about 20 miles from Albuquerque. And he refused. He said, I do not want anything to do with you people. You ruined my life before. The other people who came, everybody, they ruined it. And they told him, well, they told you, the other space beings, not to release the photographs until you were told when to do it. And you went and did it. Well, they kept it, and Paul wouldn't anything to do with him, and I guess a couple months had passed, and then they finally convinced him, and he went out there, 20 miles outside of Albuquerque. And here comes the first craft. That came in over his pickup truck. This was taken in 1966. The craft left its hovering position, banked around the trees. As the craft flying saucer was banking around the trees, Paul snapped another shot as he was moving to photograph it. You can see propulsion type of tubes, we call them propulsion, stick coming out the back of the craft. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. I don't know if we can zoom in closer on that. The flying saucer made its maneuvers around the trees. It settled in an area and hovered so it would not harm the planet. Paul snapped another photograph of it. You can see the craft similar window openings back to the Dan Fry pictures, but only of a smaller diameter spaceship. This craft came in closer. It's about a quarter of a mile away from Paul right now. And you can see the bars where the glass is, where the shields come down and protect it when it's from space debris, when it's traversing throughout the solar systems and galaxies. Paul was told this is 160 feet in diameter. After this was taken, this photograph, Mr. Villa said the craft came down right where it is and hovered right above the ground. A doorway opened, and out walked 9 beings. 4 women and 5 men, all 7 to 9 feet tall, perfectly proportioned, beautiful complexions, all emitting the Christ light of love from each one of them. And they were not here to harm Paul. Paul doesn't really realize what his mission was, but to photograph these particular craft. He photographed the beings. We were unable to get the negatives or photographs, as Paul was told. Do not release the pictures until you are told of the beings. The people from this craft were from the constellation Spiral Galaxy Como Berenices, or Berenices, however you want to pronounce it, approximately 450 million light years away. And this is taken in 1966. Not science fiction, this is a real photograph, flying saucer. This particular photograph in 1972 was analyzed by the CIA, and I was there in the room when they were doing it for 30 minutes. They had it projected on the wall, an immense wall of a home just set up to cover the slide to cover the whole wall, and they went over this thing with a fine-tooth comb for 30 minutes and could not find wires, could not see anything. And I told them, I said their whole problem was that they were all jealous or envious because they're unable to talk about what they know, and which is typical with not only our United States government, but the governments of the world. Another photograph of the craft from Como Berenices. A few years later, Mr. Paul Villa was again contacted by a spaceship. He heard the voice in his head, and he said, come on out to the such and such place, about 15 miles outside of Albuquerque, and you can take some photographs of our craft. And you'd see what Paul was driving at the time. So he got his camera, got in his truck, and went out. He was very at ease now with the space beings. And his craft came up and hovered. And while it was hovering, right directly beneath the craft, a fire started from the major amount of turbulence from this craft. And in the process, they told Paul they could not come any closer because it was too powerful a craft. And it started a fire. A tree is bending over. I don't know if we can isolate that, take a closer look at it. But the fire was burning right up the tree, and Paul said a light beam came down out of the craft and extinguished the fire, and he photographed what was going on, but the beam did not record on the film, and you can see the smoke from the debris. One of the trees on the left is bending over from the turbulence force. They told Paul they're going to have to leave the area and maneuver around so they do not harm the planet. They are not allowed to harm the planet. And they apologized for causing this fire. This is the craft after it maneuvered to a safe area where it would not harm the planet and just stay there. Paul was told this is 360 feet in diameter. I maneuvered a little closer before it took off, and this was the last shot that Paul Villa got of this particular spacecraft. Where they were from, he never said. In 1972, Paul Villa was again contacted mentally to get his camera, go out to a certain area outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, about 20 miles out, which they call the desert, their desert region. So he drove out there, And he parked his car and he got out. And he looked around and he saw these, he had this feeling, the impression to look in this one direction and take a picture, and these three little balls appear. So he photographed them. You can see by Paul's car what he was driving at the time. This is 1972. What had happened, one of the balls went around to the back of the Cadillac, and it gave you can see that flash of light or flare. It exploded, and the other two were just went off someplace. And this appeared, a small flying saucer with a silver ball.